Abel Brown was born in Springfield, Massachusetts, in November 1810. When he was 11, his family relocated to Madison County in the heart of New York's abolition country. There, he would attend the Hamilton Literary and Theological Institution, founded by the Baptist Society of the State of New York. Brown was adamant in his religious devotion, becoming a tireless, itinerant preacher and reformer. He denounced intemperance, the cause of so many social ills. He labored vigorously for Sabbath schools and Bible education, the only remedy for such a vice as alcohol. Brown encountered resistance nearly every time he preached, and it often turned physical. But he was devoted to reform, no matter the cost, even if it meant being whipped or stoned. Brown called himself a Baptist only because he knew he needed to be affiliated with a denomination in order to preach. He rejected the Baptist Church in all but name and condemned it for its failure to confront intemperance and slavery, especially among its own members.
I do not patronize any of the hypocritical Baptist periodicals. I pay nothing to their societies, and I receive nothing from them. I do endeavor to rebuke their sins whenever an opportunity presents.
He began by criticizing the Hamilton institution, telling friends who were still attending that they should sever ties with the school. Its benefactor, the Baptist Church, allowed slaveholders to worship in its congregations, and the institution itself refused to allow students to form anti-slavery organizations.
The cause of anti-slavery has very much opposition, but it is advancing and will soon prevail. The truth will always prosper.
After being an abolitionist in sentiment more so than in practice, and while he continued promoting his first causes, temperance and Sabbath schools, the destruction of slavery and assisting freedom seekers became his primary focus.
I would as soon baptize old Satan himself as a believer in or a practicer of slavery. My spirit cannot rest so long as my brethren are crushed by the iron hoof of oppression.
And he carried on his role in the fight from the Capital Region, the abolitionist stronghold and underground railroad center of eastern New York, where he took up the post of pastor of Sand Lake Baptist Church in the spring of 1841. In Albany, he became involved with Edwin W. Goodwin and his radical anti-slavery newspaper, Tocsin of Liberty. Brown was also a principal organizer of the Eastern New York Anti-Slavery Society, serving as both its corresponding secretary and forwarding merchant. His work as forwarding merchant often appeared in the pages of the Tocsin under the heading, "Kidnappers Look Here." He took pleasure in reporting the whereabouts of freedom seekers, alerting the slaveholders that had kidnappers trailing them that even their best efforts to recover them would fall short, especially when the Albany Vigilance Committee was involved. He informed Robert Gilmore of Baltimore that he need not give himself further trouble about his very intelligent and noble slaves. After telling Margaret Culver the whereabouts of her former slave Levi, Brown asked that she forward the $25 reward for that information to the Vigilance Committee office. They certainly needed the funds. The work of the forwarding merchants was costly, and as Brown often said, the shipping season was far from over. He continued his itinerant preaching, finding doors closed to him as often as they were open, in places like Poughkeepsie, Peekskill, and Brooklyn. He made up for those setbacks by preaching at the docks on the Hudson River. He also journeyed west, preaching in Illinois, Michigan, and Wisconsin Territory, where he was often greeted more positively than he was in New York. He called the people he met in the West great-hearted abolitionists who made slavery tremble, who were wide awake and determined to trample slavery in the dust. One man who heard Brown speak in Essex County wrote an editorial praising his efforts in New York's North Country, which was printed in the Albany Patriot, the new name of the Tocsin of Liberty.
No man that loves the truth can resist him in his fearless and terrible attack upon the hoary-headed cannibal, American slavery. He is a red-hot sword, cutting right through the living flesh of the beast that has its priests in every town.
And if these pro-slavery priests couldn't stop Abel Brown, they would hire someone who they thought could. In August 1844, Brown was in Troy, where he hoped to form a Liberty Party association to assist James G. Birney's presidential campaign. As he began to speak on both abolitionism and temperance, a man named Frank Cleveland stepped forward and did what he had been paid to do, to make as much noise as loud as he could to prevent Brown from being heard. He tried again the next day, but was drowned out once more by what was described as a terrible howling. Cleveland would allow Brown's frequent companion, fugitive slave Lewis Washington, to speak instead, but Washington refused. The following day, Brown tried again, only to have his speech on political abolitionism disrupted by the wailing of a group of 20 men, no longer just one. On the fourth day, Brown and the anti-slavery audience walked to the home of Reverend Fayette Shippard, being beaten and stoned over the entire distance. One member of the mob confessed that it intended to trample Brown to death. At Shippard's home, Brown delivered his entire anti-slavery address, not allowing the freedom of speech to be trampled in the dust. Nothing could slow him down, but it wouldn't matter if it did. Brown was prepared to give his life for the cause, in the present or after another 40 years in the fight. Just 2 months after the mob scene in Troy, he made his final journey, this time to western New York. On October 15th, he spoke to a gathering of Rochester Baptists, still holding the church to account for its shortcomings in dealing with intemperance and slavery. He told his audience it felt like the last time he would ever speak to them. He was next due in Canandaigua, but his journey was complicated by a severe turn in the weather. He sought shelter from a stranger who, when finding out Brown's purpose, refused his request, threatening to shoot him if he didn't leave immediately. He continued on through the cold and driving winds, arriving at his next engagement on the 21st. Due to sickness, exhaustion from his travels, and fatigue from the travails of his entire career, he could barely speak a word. On November 1st, he wrote to his wife telling her that he meant to speak in Buffalo before returning home. Instead, at the home of a friend in Canandaigua, unable to carry on, his condition worsened rapidly. On November 8th, one day before his 34th birthday, Abel Brown was called home to his Savior. He was eulogized in Troy by Henry Highland Garnett, and his obituary was published in newspapers as far away as Wisconsin Territory. A resolution was passed by the colored citizens of Canandaigua, declaring that the name of the man who assisted no fewer than 1,000 freedom seekers during his life shall live to the grateful recollection of colored Americans. His epitaph concludes saying, "His memory lies embalmed in the heart of many a fugitive, and on the leaves of immortality his deeds are inscribed."
The slaves must be free. Yes, they will be free or death will overwhelm the nation. There are many abolitionists who will labor without any relaxation of effort until slavery dies. One person cannot do everything, yet the individual efforts of one may be the lever which will overturn the great Bastille of slavery. Abel Brown.